We continue our offseason episodes with a special fan interview. Joining us to talk about the Kings and their history is the Kingstorian on this episode of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm also co-host of the Puck Podcast. It's a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 16 years. And of course, a passionate LA Kings fan for the past 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL. And when you enter the promo code LockedOnNHL, they'll throw in a free custom Birddog Yeti-style tumbler with every order. Before we get to our special guest today, we do have some exciting news to pass along, as expected by many people. After that three-team trade on Tuesday, the LA Kings did, in fact, sign free agent defenseman Vladislav Gavrikov today with that cap room that they freed up. A 2-year deal worth $5.875 million per season. We will have a full breakdown on this news coming up on tomorrow's show, what it means for the Kings going forward, plus a full player breakdown of Gavrikov now that we know that he's going to be a part of the LA Kings for the next 2 seasons. That's coming up tomorrow. As for today, you may know our special guest if you are on Twitter. He is known as the Kingstorian. He reminds us of what's going on in this day in Kings history. Maybe throw out a Kings birthday shout out as well. Let's find out more about him and get his thoughts on the LA Kings, past and present. It is Harry Ouzounian. Hey, Harry,
That's
how
right.
are you?
Great. Thanks for having me on, Eddie.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I believe I heard that you recently got back from your honeymoon.
Yes, that's right. I was gone for 20 days, and now I'm a married man.
Well, congratulations on that. So real quick, let us know a little bit about you, kind of what's your story, where you're from, and when did you become a Kings fan?
So I grew up in Los Angeles. I was born in LA, and the first 2 sports I actually latched onto, I think it's by happenstance, were the Showtime era Lakers and the Dodgers. That was when the Dodgers had Oral Hershiser, Fernando Valenzuela, and, the Showtime era Lakers with Magic, Kareem. It was just, they were on TV all the time. I couldn't help but become a fan of those sports until Wayne Gretzky came along. So at a very young age, I felt like we were spoiled. We also had Vince Scully, Chick Hearn, Bob Miller, and it's just, constant flow of sports coming in. And this is before the internet, so my sources of information back then were watching the news for sports highlights, or when the games were on network TV, and reading the LA Times. So Stu Nahan had a big influence on me. I watched him on TV all the time, and he was a big hockey fan and big advocate of the Kings. So I can credit Stu Nahan for getting me into hockey.
Yeah, old LA sports broadcaster from Channel 5, I believe, back in the day.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
So you and I have something in common, because I was also, although I was not born in Los Angeles, raised in Central California, I was a big Lakers fan and loved Magic Johnson and didn't really get into hockey and get interested until Wayne Gretzky came to LA. It piqued my interest. And then I remember a certain year where they went to the Stanley Cup final where I was completely sold on the sport of hockey and on the LA Kings. And I'm going to ask you specifically about that in just a little bit.
Sure.
But have you always been a fan of history? And when did you decide to start something like the Kingstorian Twitter account where you're kind of sharing the history of the Kings, this day in Kings history on a daily basis?
Yeah, it was actually urging of my friends, because we talk about the Kings so much and we've been fans for so long. And they always urged me, you should do something Kings and hockey oriented. I worked on hockey video games in the past for 2K Sports. And a big part of my job, I was in charge of the rosters. And we also got into creating historic teams, and so I always had an interest in the history. And there's also, those Kings videotapes. There was a 25th anniversary video that was released in 1991, 92. And so I always had an interest in the history of the organization. And I always felt like not enough was done with that, especially when, the offseason comes along and you're starving for hockey. And back then, the only thing we had was pro beach hockey or roller hockey to watch. So, so because of those reasons, and I felt like I could create content daily with this, in addition to the history of the Kings, there's so many players. And I think a good way to remember even the obscure players who only played in one game with the Kings is to bring up the birthdays.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. I'm a big fan of history, and I feel like I'm pretty knowledgeable about the Kings, but there's certainly players that I didn't know about. We've had people email this show to talk about some of the old, Forum Blue and Gold days, and some players that I really didn't know much about at all. So it's always fun to learn about the history of the Kings and some of the players that I even wasn't that familiar with. I really wish I could have saw Marcel Dion play. I know how great he was, and one of the all-time Kings great, but I don't have any reference of actually seeing him play and seeing how great he was. But that's very cool that you worked in the video games and all that. That's awesome. I certainly grew up as a young man, very influenced by video games as well. Now, I know you were tweeting while on your honeymoon, so clearly you are very dedicated to doing this. And I can relate to this a little bit. Like I said, I've only been doing this show since July. And I remember thinking, 20-minute show, Monday through Friday, I can handle that. Well, it has turned out to be a little bit more than I thought it was. I wonder if maybe that was the case for you as well when you started this, that you thought, maybe this is taking up a little bit more of my time than I had intended, but it's kind of turned into a labor of love for you a little bit, I guess.
It's been both. Yeah, I knew in advance, and I prepare my posts well in advance. So I have about a month's worth of posts ready to go.
Nice.
But and I kind of timed it where we were overseas in Greece and in France. And so I kind of knew what time I should be posting so that they still get posted at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. But there were some times where we just had too much going on, where I had to post a little bit later in the day. But I was happy I kept that consistency going. I didn't want to miss a beat. So, it helps getting everything prepared well in advance. So, and I already know what's on the horizon. And there's some painful memories, like draft memories coming up. I've been posting about the 93 finals, which the McSorley stick incident that a lot of fans don't. So.
Well, history is a thing where, you don't just have to remember all the good times. That part of the Kings history is some tough times too. And that makes it even sweeter to go through all those tough times as Kings fans once they finally did win Stanley Cup or two. And we'll talk about that in a second. I did want to ask you real quick, and this is going to sound like a humble brag. I'm not trying to do that. But my personal Twitter account, and I work in sports media, so, I have some sports guys following me and things like that. Probably my most famous follow is Tom Cruise, and it comes from the Kings. He was at a Kings game that I was at, and I just tweeted out, hey, Tom Cruise is at the Kings game. And then after that, his account followed me. Now, I know it's not really him. It's somebody who does it for him. But that's probably my most famous Hollywood follow on Twitter. As the Kingstorian, I'm curious, and there are certainly celebrity fans. We saw Will Ferrell in the playoffs this year and others. You got anybody that follows your account that you know of that's kind of famous, or any interesting stories about any followers you have?
I know Colin Hanks follows my account. No one at the level of Tom Cruise. Would be cool if Tom Hanks got to follow my account. I've tweeted about him being at Gretzky's 802 goal game. He's actually featured in a highlight in that one. But mostly former players. It's always fun to have follows and interactions with former players and current ones as well, whenever that does happen. But in terms of celebrities, Aaron Andrews. I have to mention Aaron Andrews. Yes.
There you go. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So Colin Hanks is obviously a big Kings fan.
Right.
Would
I
love
mean,
to get him
Igor
on
Liba jersey.
yeah, maybe I can get him on this show at some point. We'll see. I got to try and reach out to some of those people, see what we can do. We've got more with Harry, the Kingstorian. We're going to talk a little bit about some recent tweets that he had in Kings history. There's some good ones coming up as well, but there's one in particular that he just mentioned a moment ago that was a little bit of a tough one. But real quick, I do want to remind everybody that today's episode of Locked On LA Kings is brought to you by Birddogs. Now, what is that? Well, it's actually shorts that have the underwear built in, and that might sound weird, but I ask you, is being comfortable weird? Because these shorts are unbelievably comfortable and they look good. Lots of different colors to choose from. And how often does something that looks good actually feel good as well? It's a perfect combination. I'll be wearing my Birddogs when I do yard work or to go out to a nice dinner with my wife, and my wife loves them because they actually look good, and I usually don't wear things that look good. So go to birddogs.com/lockedonnhl, and when you do, enter the promo code LOCKEDONNHL. They'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every purchase. Again, that is birddogs.com, birddogs.com. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL for your free gift. So continuing with Harry, the Kingstorian, and there have been some recent tweets, and there's some coming up that are very important in Kings history. But let me get this one out of the way because I did retweet it and comment on it. June 3rd, 1993, the Kings led 2-1 in Montreal in Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Final. They were ready to come home, leading 2-0. I have no doubt they were going to win the Stanley Cup had they won that Game 2, but didn't turn out that way. Marty McSorley gets called for the penalty because of the illegal stick. Montreal ties it up on the ensuing power play and then goes on to win it in overtime, and then they go on to win the series. Obviously, it's a very infamous moment in Kings history. What is your recollection of that? And how tough of a moment was that for you as a Kings fan?
That was easily the most painful moment because you had a feeling where it's going to be really tough to get back to that level. And as we saw in the years afterwards, the Kings didn't make the playoffs again until 1998, and they did not win another playoff game until 2001. So that was very painful. As for the incident itself, well, why is he playing with an illegal stick that late in the game? You wonder about that. And I mean, a lot of people still give Marty McSorley a lot of flack over it. And I know he had his press conference back in 2012 during the Cup Finals to address that incident from 1993. But, the Kings lost 3 games consecutively in overtime.
Yes, they did.
And they didn't have another lead in the series after Game 2. So they could have played better. I don't know if it just mentally broke down after that Game 2, but it was painful. It was very painful for me as a young fan. And I was 11 back then when it happened.
All right. Well, I'm a little older than you. I was in college, actually.
Okay.
And that was the first year where I really went all in on the Kings. I watched the whole season. It wasn't just, watching every once in a while. And then the playoffs, I got so sucked into it. And then, the Game 7 in Toronto with Gretzky, which I know you tweeted that out as well. That was a great moment. Gretzky says it's the greatest game he ever played. And then, they come up short. But at the time, I'm just now getting on board. So I'm thinking, okay, this is great. This is going to be fun. And then, as you mentioned, it wasn't a lot of fun after that for quite some time.
Yeah, we got to learn at a young age that growing pains, and it made it more rewarding in 2012.
It really did. No, that's very true. And let's talk about some of those happy anniversaries. One of them that has happened already, June 1st, 2014, Game 7 Western Conference Finals in Chicago. Alec Martinez with the overtime game winner. Kings go on to win the Stanley Cup. And I've said, and I don't know if I'm rare in this regard, and look, winning the first Stanley Cup, I get what comes with that, and we'll talk about that in a second. But to me, I really enjoyed the 2014 run more. Winning all those Game 7s, having the big comeback against San Jose, beating the Ducks in the only playoff series we've ever had. And then that Game 7 against Chicago, I have said, and I've seen my favorite team play in a Super Bowl, but that came down to the final seconds. Yeah. That Game 7 against Chicago for me was the most anxiety I have ever felt as a sports fan, knowing that on any second it could either be all over or we're going to the final. And the relief I had when Marty scored that goal was as exuberant as I've ever had as a sports fan. So that game really has a big impact on me as a sports fan.
And it's quite the opposite where you see how the 2012 run was, where they led comfortably in every series. And in 2014, it was just nerve-wracking. So we got to experience two different extremes with both Stanley Cup runs. And it did make 2014 feel even more rewarding because of those reasons that you explained.
And I think you win one Stanley Cup, and that's great. But when you win another one in a short amount of time, it almost validates that first cup. Like, it wasn't just a lucky run. Oh, you got to play Arizona in the conference final. This was, some more formidable opponents. Beating Chicago in the conference final was obviously a big deal because they were in their heyday as well. So for me, 2014, I love that more. But of course, 2012 was special as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it made it more sweeter because of the fact that Chicago had beaten the Kings the year prior in the conference finals. So it was like the two behemoths getting in each other's ways of the Stanley Cup in terms of, having repeated cup wins. But and now both teams went through rebuilds. Chicago's a little bit further behind, but now that they're going to draft Connor Bedard, that might accelerate things for them.
Yeah, conspiracy theories abound that Chicago was able to win that draft. And no, not Anaheim or Columbus. The big market. He gets to go there. What a surprise! But there are a couple of dates coming up that are going to be. I'm going to definitely retweet coming up from the Kingstorian. And the first one is June 11th of 2012. The Kings finally win their first Stanley Cup, and as I mentioned, when I got on board, I kind of thought this was going to be fun. And then there were a lot of lean years. And I think, you look back on it now, I'm sure you remember, there were Kings fans, and I was one of them, that legitimately thought, will we ever see this team win the Stanley Cup? There was some serious doubt because they had so many lean years and so many seasons of just, futility that you wondered if it was ever going to happen. So for it to finally happen was obviously enormous. And just what are your memories on the Kings finally winning that Stanley Cup, June 11th of 2012?
It's almost like a blur because that whole Stanley Cup run. I remember the St. Louis series and eliminating them just being overfilled with joy. It felt like once they won that series that there really wasn't going to be much that could stop the Kings. And this is after a season where you questioned if they were even going to make the playoffs. Until Daryl Sutter took over. But it was just the feeling of, and then getting to the conference finals against the Coyotes and just the way they eliminated them. The Dustin Brown hit, and then Penner winning it in overtime. They just had so much momentum going for them where you felt like even though they lost 2 games in a row to the Devils, and it had to be done in Game 6, you felt that they were going to win. There was no way they were going to blow this, and there was no way Daryl Sutter was going to allow them to blow that series lead where they were up 3-0. So just seeing it finally happen when Dustin Brown lifted that cup, you felt all those years of frustration just pouring out. I went down the street with my friend, like when they won the cup. We were just so excited.
Yeah, and I've mentioned this a few times on this show. My wife is as diehard of a Chargers fan as you'll ever meet, and she sometimes asks me, especially that team has ripped her heart out on more than one occasion. I don't know if you're an NFL fan or not, but even in the playoffs this year, where they blew a huge halftime lead, and she'll look at me and say, do you really think they'll ever win it in my lifetime? And I want to tell her, yes, it's going to happen. And all these years of heartache for you, it's going to be the most amazing thing. But I can't tell her that because that's sports. You don't know how it's going to go. How many years did the Red Sox and Cubs go without winning World Series? I mean, people lived long lives and died and didn't see it. Yeah. So I hope for my poor wife that can happen for her. But I know, what that feeling was like and you're right. All those frustrating years, all those tough moments did make it a lot sweeter. And no disrespect to maybe Vegas if they win it this year. Those fans haven't known any heartache. It's all been good times for them. So I get why that rubs people the wrong way, but going through those tough times, it absolutely makes it sweeter, like you said, for sure.
The heartache for Vegas fans was seeing their team lose in the Cup final in the first year in their inaugural season.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and they're 2 wins away from winning the Cup. So, yeah, they're a little bit spoiled. But
you think? Yeah.
Credit to that team, though. They've built a solid team, and no one gave them a chance when they entered the league. No one knew William Karlsson was going to be the player that he was, and Marcia So, and all these players who were cast-offs. So, yeah, kudos to them.
You have to give them credit. That's true. And I've told people, if we were in their shoes, we'd be arrogant, spoiled fans too. I mean, how could they not be? They've known nothing but good times. I know, and it's interesting. This year's Florida Panthers, a lot of people comparing them to the LA Kings back in 2012 when they were the 8th seed and snuck in and went on this run. Doesn't look like it's going to end up the way it did for the Kings, unfortunately. But we'll see. It's not looking good for the Panthers. But we'll see.
No, I feel for their fans.
Yeah, that's another fan base, right? That's had a lot of lean years as well.
And they got swept in '96 the last time they made the finals.
They did. So. Yes, they did. They're still looking for their first ever final win. Hopefully they get it. I hope if they get swept again, boy, that would be tough. Also, June 13th of 2014, we talked about it a little bit, but the Kings win their second Stanley Cup. I mentioned what it means to me, that run, how I kind of enjoyed it more, how I love how it really validated almost the first cup because of the tough road that they had to go through, all the game sevens, beating the Ducks, which was so much fun. And I think Teemu Selanne is an amazing player, but seeing him go out like that, I got a little schadenfreude out of that, I guess you could say. But real quick, what are your thoughts on the 2014 Cup? We talked about it a little bit already.
Well, I remember it was a Friday the 13th. Yes.
Right. I did not remember that.
Yeah, I remember that because the season after where they missed the playoffs, people were like, oh, the Kings are cursed now. But in terms of the memories of that Cup run, I remember all the overtimes against the Rangers. 3 games were won in overtime, similar to what happened in '93, but this time the Kings came on the winning side as opposed to losing 3 straight against the Canadiens. But and I remember that pile of snow saving the Rangers from being swept in Game 4. And Dustin Brown scored in that game, I recall, in Game 4 in Madison Square Garden. But coming back, it's just that Kings team was so resilient. It seemed like anytime they were down, there was confidence from the fans that they were going to be coming back. And it seemed like Gaborik was scoring every one of those goals to tie the game. So that was probably the greatest feeling as a fan to experience that. The 3 game sevens on the road, 3 overtime wins in the Cup final. And it just validated the Kings as they're not a fluke. It's not like a one-year wonder where they win 1 cup and they're done. That team was built to last. Unfortunately, it didn't happen with all the issues that the team went through thereafter in the next couple of seasons. But that was a solid team, and now we're trying to see the Kings get back to that level.
Absolutely, and I want to ask you about that in just a second. So we'll talk a little bit about the Kings' current situation. But real quick, I do need to remind you guys that we do have the NBA Finals going on right now. The Denver Nuggets are taking on the Miami Heat, and now is the perfect time to download the FanDuel app. It is America's #1 sports book because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. It's a bonus bet back when your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to points scored to 3-pointers made. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, wrapping it up with the Kingstorian, Harry Ouzounian. Great to have you here. And I do want to obviously get your thoughts on what's going on with the Kings right now. They made the playoffs for a second year in a row, but they lose in the first round for the second year in a row. A lot of news this week. As I mentioned at the top of the show, they did re-sign Vladislav Gavrikov. So we'll see what a full season of him back on the blue line will be like. And there's still some things to do. We're looking at what's going on in net. Your thoughts on where the Kings are right now, and are you optimistic about the direction they're going in, or are you still kind of cautiously waiting to see how it goes?
I'd say more cautiously optimistic because, the question in net, we don't know who the starting goalie is going to be come opening night. But clearly, Rob Blake's going to do something to address that. Whether or not it's going to be Korpisalo, there seems to be a lot of options in terms of free agency and trade options. A lot of goalies' names are out there. So I feel like that team will be rather active. There's no way they're satisfied with what's happened with the first round exits, even though they pushed Edmonton the year prior. They were eliminated in 6 games this year. I feel like the team, and maybe they're internally thinking of this, is they need to be more physical. That was an issue against the Oilers. They weren't physical enough against them, and the Oilers pushed them around. So if they can get a little bit beefier in the lineup, that would be definitely helpful. The special teams, well, the power play improved. The penalty kill needs to catch up to the power play and be a lot better. If they're just average, that would be a huge improvement. So if they can address the penalty killing, size issue, and in net, Kings are looking good. I think they can bounce back and be even better. And they did have a terrific season. The regular season was great. They went on a whimper in the playoffs, but I think they can do some damage with a couple of additions to the roster.
All right. And anything you want to wrap it up with us as far as letting us know? I mean, the Kingstorian is on Twitter at Kingstorian. Just anything you want to let people know about the account, or anything you want to share as far as running the account, or just any way you want to close it out with the interview here?
You can follow me, Twitter, Instagram. I'm also on Reddit. I'm posting on the Kings Forum. There's some painful memories I might go through with the previous draft results. But there's also some great ones also with Drew Doughty and Andrei Kopitar's drafts. So just tune in. I'm posting daily. And if you want to fill of Kings content over the summer, tune in to Eddie's podcast and also to the Kingstorian.
Absolutely. No, it's great. You're a great follow. I love being reminded of things, sometimes good and bad. We don't remember everything, right? We have memories, but it's good to get reminded of things and to learn new things as well about players from the past and things like that. So you're doing a great job as a Kings fan. I really appreciate the work you do. And it was great to get to know you a little bit, and appreciate you sharing some of your story with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. Thanks for having me on.
All right. We look forward to more tweets from the Kingstorian going forward this offseason. Thank you, Harry. And maybe we'll see you at a game next season.
Yeah, definitely. Take care.
Right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. That, again, was Harry Ouzounian, and we were very happy to have him join us on the show today. Hope you guys enjoyed that. And again, if you're on Twitter, and as you mentioned, the Instagram as well, you really do need to follow him. I'm not just saying that because he was a friend of the show today, but it's a great follow, especially on Twitter. Get reminding every day of what's going on or what has happened in Kings history. It's educational and entertaining, in my opinion. Again, it is at Kingstorian, Kingstorian. Definitely need to follow him on Twitter. All right. So for you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch this show every day, we are coming up tomorrow with, again, what I mentioned, a full recap and breakdown of the Vladislav Gavrikov signing, what it means for the Kings going forward, and what else they still need to do. And then, of course, on Friday, we have our weekly Kings fan feedback show. There is so much to react to for this week. I got to imagine we're going to have a stuffed email inbox, but looking forward to reading all your emails, getting all your reaction from the Alex Faust news, from the 3-team trade, to re-signing Vladislav Gavrikov, and of course, talking about the Kingstorian as a friend of the show as well now. Looking forward to all that coming up on Friday. Want to send an email, lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE, lockedoneddie@gmail.com. You can always leave comments below on the YouTube episodes if you're watching as well. And we'd love you to stay interactive with our Twitter account and also on Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings, go.